The moment an avoidant starts pulling away is small, quiet, and almost invisible, and that's exactly why most people miss it. Nothing obviously goes wrong. They're still texting you, still seeing you, still showing up in ways that seem normal on the surface. But underneath all of that, something has already shifted. And if you don't recognize that shift early, you usually only realize what happened when they're already emotionally gone. Most people think avoidants pull away suddenly, like they wake up one day and decide to detach. But that's not how it works. The process starts internally, long before anything changes on the outside. As the emotional connection deepens, their nervous system begins to interpret closeness as a threat instead of safety. Even if everything between you is healthy, calm, and positive, something inside them starts to feel overwhelmed. It's not always conscious. They don't sit there thinking, I need to distance myself now. Instead, their system automatically starts creating space. To really understand this moment, you have to understand what closeness feels like to an avoidant. For most people, intimacy brings warmth, safety, and connection. But for someone with avoidant attachment, intimacy can feel like pressure, expectation, and loss of control. The closer they get, the more they feel like they're being pulled into something they might not be able to manage. It's not that they don't care, it's that caring activates fear. And that fear doesn't show up as panic. It shows up as distance. Before they physically pull away, they start pulling away emotionally. They become just a little less present. Conversations that once felt deep and engaging begin to feel slightly surface level. They stop asking meaningful questions. They stop leaning in emotionally. You might notice that you're the one carrying the emotional weight more and more, but it's subtle enough that you question yourself instead of them. You might think, maybe they're just tired, or maybe they've had a long week. And that's exactly why this moment is so easy to miss. Because nothing is clearly wrong. Then their communication begins to shift, but again, not in a dramatic way. They don't disappear completely. That would make things obvious. Instead, they slowly reduce their presence. Their responses take longer. The tone of their messages becomes flatter. There's less playfulness, less curiosity, less emotional engagement. Before, they might have asked how you felt, what you were thinking, what mattered to you. Now, the conversations revolve more around surface-level topics. Logistics, small talk, safe subjects that don't require vulnerability. And because they're still there, still responding, your brain tries to normalize it. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself it doesn't mean anything. But your intuition starts picking up on the shift. And that's where the internal conflict begins. Another sign, one that people often overlook, is subtle irritation. Things that never bothered them before suddenly seem to trigger them. You asking normal questions, expressing needs, or wanting connection can start to feel like too much to them. Not because you've changed, but because their tolerance for closeness has decreased. So they might respond with short answers, slight defensiveness, a change in tone that feels colder than usual. And when you feel that change, you naturally want to fix it. You want to bring things back to how they were. But this is where most people unknowingly make the situation worse. Because the moment you feel distance, your instinct is to close the gap. You reach out more. You try harder. You become more emotionally available, hoping it will bring them back. But to an avoidant, this doesn't feel like love. It feels like pressure. To understand why, you have to look at what triggered this shift in the first place. Avoidants don't pull away randomly. There is almost always a moment right before the distance begins, a moment of increased emotional intensity. It could have been a deep conversation where you both opened up, a vulnerable moment where feelings were expressed more clearly, physical intimacy that created a stronger bond, or even just the realization that the relationship is becoming serious. For most people, these moments create connection. For an avoidant, they can activate fear. Because deeper connection means higher expectations. It means emotional responsibility. It means the possibility of being needed, depended on, or losing independence. And when that fear gets activated, their system looks for relief. Distance becomes that relief. But here's the part that makes it so confusing. They don't consciously decide to pull away. It just starts happening. They might not even understand why they suddenly feel different. One day they were engaged, open, and present, and the next, something feels off. Instead of analyzing it deeply, they follow the feeling. and that feeling tells them to create space. Now here's why you miss this moment almost every time. You're looking for something obvious. You expect pulling away to look like rejection, like someone clearly losing interest, like a conversation where they tell you something is wrong. But avoidants don't usually do that in the early stages. They fade, slowly, subtly, and your brain fills in the gaps with explanations that protect the connection. They're just busy. They're stressed. They've got a lot going on right now. So instead of stepping back and observing the change, you move closer. You try to reconnect. You might send longer messages, ask more questions, try to recreate emotional moments that felt good before. You might even ask them directly, "Is everything okay?" And while that question comes from a place of care, to an avoidant it can feel like being put on the spot, like they're being asked to explain something they don't fully understand themselves. So what do? They withdraw more, not because they don't care, but because they feel overwhelmed. This creates a painful cycle. You feel distance, so you move closer. They feel pressure, so they move away. You feel more distance, so you try harder. They feel more pressure, so they detach further. And before you know it, the connection that once felt natural starts to feel strained, confusing, and unstable. At this point, many people start blaming themselves. They think, did I do something wrong? Was I too much? Did I push them away? And while it's important to reflect on your own behavior, this pattern is not created by you alone. It's the interaction between your response and their attachment system. So what actually works in this moment? The answer is not what most people expect. You don't fix this by chasing harder. You don't fix it by over-explaining your feelings. And you definitely don't fix it by trying to force closeness. What works is doing the opposite of your instinct. When you notice the shift, you slow down. If they take longer to respond, you don't immediately fill the space. If they become less emotionally available, you don't overextend to compensate. If the energy drops, you allow it to drop without panicking. This is not about playing games. It's about maintaining emotional balance. Because relationships require mutual investment. And when one person starts pulling back, the healthiest response is not to overgive, it's to stay grounded. Another key part is regulating your internal reaction. It's very easy to take an avoidance distance personally. It can feel like rejection, like you're not enough, like something about you caused this change. But in reality, what's happening is rooted in their internal world. Their fear of closeness, their discomfort with vulnerability, their need for space to feel safe again. And unless you understand that, you'll keep reacting in ways that unintentionally push them further away. If you do choose to address the shift, the way you communicate matters. Instead of approaching it with urgency or pressure, you keep it calm and open. You might say something like, "I've noticed things feel a bit different lately. No pressure. I just wanted to check in." This kind of communication creates space for honesty without demanding it. It signals awareness without intensity. And for an avoidant, that can make a huge difference. Because at the core of avoidant behavior is not a lack of feeling, but a fear of being overwhelmed by it. They don't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because caring feels like something they might lose control over. The moment an avoidant starts pulling away isn't loud. It doesn't come with clear signals or dramatic changes. It's quiet, subtle, and easy to overlook. But once you learn to recognize it, you stop chasing confusion. You stop reacting impulsively, and you start responding with awareness, which completely changes the dynamic. Because the earlier you catch that moment, the more power you have to handle it differently.